As the days and weeks tick down to the November election for the next US president, it's becoming more and more apparent that it's freedom of speech itself, the US Constitution, the First Amendment, that is the last obstacle to the total control of the information flow and supply desired by the oligarchs, that group of self-appointed individuals that seems to have decided that the right to control the narrative is theirs. Watch this clip that has surfaced in the last few days.
Say your uncle in like Ohio said something about like Kamala Harris is isn't unfit to be a president because he doesn't have a child.
Okay.
That kind of shit is automatically demoted.
Meet Jeevan Gawali, a senior software engineer at Meta.
Are they doing a good job protecting our democracy? Because I can see these like right-wing groups like setting up Instagram accounts or Facebook accounts for that matter, right? And just start posting disinformation, be like, Harris is like blah, blah, blah.
That's all going to be demoted 100%. The civic classifier is strong.
It's becoming unavoidable. It's becoming impossible not to question where these social media platforms came from in the first place. What the motivation originally was behind their creation. You know, we were invited in the first place to think of something like Facebook as just a free for all, a forum for the sharing of information. You know, essentially, you know, unmonitored, just somewhere that people could go, put up ideas, share thoughts. It's becoming harder and harder to overlook the possibility that the intention always was that these would be means by which flow of information, access to information could be manipulated.
Would the person who posted that would he be notified that?
The person would not be notified, but there's these things that what we collect is like, if a bunch of items that, like if at least a couple of items that a person has created has violated civic classifier, then they're also red listed.
You know, it doesn't, as it turns out, have to be particularly obvious and in your face. It's now about selecting without people knowing what they don't see, what they don't hear. And if you don't see it and you don't hear it, and if the person putting up the information is unaware that the opinion they've shared is being artificially suppressed, then that manipulation of the narrative is all happening out of sight.
So is that called shadow banning?
Shadow banning, yeah.
Okay, so they will be shadow banned.
Correct.
They will never be shown. But so they will see a dip in like impressions, in engagement,
yeah.
But they would not be like officially warned of the reason why.
Correct.
And it begins to feel that was the intention behind something like Facebook all along. And it was when people began to use it in ways that weren't pleasing, that weren't in line with what the powerful wanted. Once that became apparent, then the steps have had to be taken to take control of those fora. There are older and other references back to it. Elon Musk has in recent times referred to the way in which Zuckerberg's Facebook, Meta, played along with the appetites of the powerful.
My understanding is that Zuckerberg spent $400 million in the last election, nominally in a get-out-the-vote campaign, but really fundamentally in support of Democrats. Is that accurate or not accurate?
That is accurate, yes.
Does that sound unbiased to you?
No, it doesn't.
Yes.
So you don't see hope that Facebook will approach this as a non-aligned arbiter? You've allowed Donald Trump back on Twitter. He hasn't taken you up on your offer because he's got his own thing.
Right.
Do you think he will go back on Twitter?
Well, that's obviously up to him. My job is to, I take the freedom of speech just very serious.
I would ask, what's the point of having forums for opinion if there's an underlying dishonesty and a manipulation of the content that people are made unaware of or are invited to disregard? What's the point in fora for opinions when some opinions are blatantly to be regarded as more equal than others? When in fact some opinions, as the testimony from this executive at Meta offers, when in fact some opinions are to be made invisible without the holder and holders of those opinions even being informed that their content's being put out of sight.
You guys have the ability to influence the outcome of the election.
Yes.
Do you think Zuckerberg agrees? Good. Is he going to help the Democrats?
Yeah.
There's an underhandedness, a sleight of hand there that ought to give everyone pause if they have any regard for freedom of speech and free debate. The enemies of free speech are so desperate now. They've increasingly abandoned any hope of proving their opponents wrong, of taking on the arguments and winning. This idea of, first of all, it was misinformation and disinformation, the implication being that what had been said was inaccurate or false. But then the final iteration of all of that was malinformation, which is freely conceded is the truth, but the truth that the powerful would rather wasn't heard. Truth that doesn't help promote the chosen narrative. Now, that's just an underhand way of lying. The process now has reached the point where the only option left to the corrupted powerful is simply to shut people up, just to silence the opposition and the dissenting voices altogether. We had climate czar, so-called climate czar John Kerry at the World Economic Forum recently, describing freedom of speech as a major obstacle to government. It gets in the way of government if people are free to speak.
There's a lot of discussion now about how you curb those entities in order to guarantee that you're going to have, some accountability on facts, et cetera. But look, if people go to only one source and the source they go to is sick and, has an agenda and they're putting out disinformation, our First Amendment stands as a major block to the ability to be able to just, hammer it out of existence.
He's saying it right out there in the open, challenging the First Amendment itself, and he's not alone. The First Amendment and the entire US Constitution are openly under attack, in no small part from so-called Democrats in the United States of America. Great play was made of the allegation all the way back in 2016. The 2016 feels like a different world now. I can't believe I ever lived there. But at that time, the Trump campaign, it was alleged, was colluding with Russia to interfere with and influence the outcome of the 2016 presidential election. Now, that allegation was subsequently found to be utterly baseless. It was a lie. And yet, it's worth remembering how angry was the response to the suggestion at the time. Arguably, the effect that had on the way that people voted. And Russiagate's still out there. Hillary Clinton, whose ruse it was, to this day repeats and refers to her assertion that Donald Trump colluded with Russia to get elected in 2016. And then, it's an ongoing process. It emerged after the 2020 election that Facebook and others had submitted to a White House demand that the Hunter Biden laptop story be utterly suppressed, debunked. Senior intelligence officials, past and present, lined up by the score to dismiss the claims of its authenticity as nothing more than propaganda. At the height of it, Twitter suspended the Twitter account of the New York Post newspaper after its reporter Miranda Devine wrote a series of stories, articles alleging dodgy business dealings by the Biden family, from which there was profit to be made. And by now we know the story about the Hunter Biden laptop was true all along, including the multiple emails about business dealings by Hunter Biden in Ukraine and elsewhere, detailing shares of profits to the big guy, being Joe Biden, when he was vice president, and other profits to other members of the Biden family and their associates. And the New York Post account was suspended, is actively denied now. It's pretended that didn't happen. But the facts are there. Now, was the suppression of that story, the Hunter Biden laptop, that content raising questions about the integrity of the Biden family, suppressing that content in that way, was that not justifiably to be described as interfering with the 2020 election? Might voters have come to think differently about Joe Biden and voted accordingly if they'd been more accurately informed about that family's business dealings at that time? But all the grandees, all the silverbacks of US politics, Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, and the rest, in the last couple of weeks, calling for more and more internet censorship, more and more control of the internet, more and more ways of ensuring the internet serves them, being Democrats, and handicaps others, being Republicans. Trump was banned from Twitter at that time, although subsequently Elon Musk has invited him back. And it's not all obvious stuff. It's not all obvious censorship. Elon Musk on record with Tucker Carlson talking about how Mark Zuckerberg spent $400 million nominally encouraging people to get out and vote, but really encouraging them to vote in support of Democrats. And the technology is sophisticated and nuanced enough now that people likely to vote Democrat can be targeted and encouraged to get out and vote, to register and vote and get out and vote. Where people that can be identified as being likely to be Republican voters or likely to vote that way, they won't get the same encouragement to get out and vote. It's very, very sophisticated. The internet is now, as an unintended consequence of its creation, it's a major Achilles heel for those who would seek to control and manipulate public opinion. Which again, it makes you wonder, makes you ask the question, was the ability to influence and control the narrative really what underpinned the creation of part of the creation of the internet in the first place? That and harvesting more private information about each one of us than could possibly have been fantasised about by a Stalin or a Mao. And so now we have this latest implicating of Meta in seeking to use its massive power to influence what voters see and don't see on their timelines in the run-up to a presidential election. In this countdown to what some seriously warn might be the last US election, it's increasingly obvious that free speech is in its death throes. It's being put to death as the last obstacle. The assessment has to be that free speech doesn't work for the powerful, not all the time, and so it has to go.